Hello, it's Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute, and I am thrilled to welcome you to this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A live show, where each week I tackle a handful of the biggest sales and marketing challenges that we're hearing about from all over the data center ecosystem, from data center operators like hyperscalers, colocation, and edge, modular wholesale data center operators and providers, as well as technology and facilities related companies that sell to and partner with data center related companies. And then there's all the construction and real estate and investor kinds of companies that are heavily involved in data centers, digital infrastructure, and critical facilities. And there's also a very vibrant ecosystem outsourced sales and marketing companies that operate in and around data centers, digital infrastructure, and critical facilities. And there's a number of roles, a number of team members who typically collaborate, who participate, who make all of this great growth happen. So among a typical data center GTM go-to-market team, perhaps you're in marketing, sales, account management, product management, channel partnerships, or maybe you're the executive leader that's responsible for recruiting and building this amazing team and making sure that everyone knows exactly what they need to do at the right time, in the right place, and in the right context to make all of your growth plans become reality, regardless of where you are on the planet. For some of you, it's good afternoon. For many of you, it's good morning. For some of you, it may even be good evening. If this is the first time that you are joining us for the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A live show, welcome. And we'd love to know if you have a question or a topic that you'd like us to address in an upcoming episode. Please feel free to drop that into the comments. And if you want to make sure that you get notified about upcoming educational events and resources just like this, make sure that you subscribe to our Data Center Sales and Marketing email newsletter that comes to your email inbox every Sunday. And you can subscribe directly on our website at www.dcsmi.com. So what's on the agenda for this week? We're going to first start out by looking at how to grow a data center network infrastructure consulting firm. Then we'll look at how to increase data center infrastructure sales. Yeah, we're going to be talking a lot about infrastructure, which is fantastic. Brings me back to my roots on how I first met the data center world, the data center ecosystem in the early 2010s, coming from the network infrastructure, PC infrastructure worlds, as well as how to find data center leads. Then we'll take a quick break for a message from our sponsor. And during the second half of this week's show, we'll talk about how to get meetings for data center thermal risk mitigation and energy efficiency solutions. After that, we'll get into how to sell data center operations optimization and compliance. And as we head down home stretch for the sixth and final question for this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A live show, we'll talk about how to improve awareness of data center recruiting services and manage those client relationships. So without any further delay, let's jump into this week's first question, which is, how do we grow a data center network infrastructure consulting firm? So your company is primarily in the business of selling consulting services around data center network infrastructure in a professional services context, and you're curious about how you can grow your business. Let's check something over here. So to grow a consulting practice specifically focused on data center network infrastructure, we first need to get some insights into where your company has been most successful in the past. And we'll usually get some clues about that by visiting your website and looking at your case studies page. And we'll presumably read about other companies that you've helped before with their data center network infrastructure. And when we do that, and perhaps this may be supplemented by some logos that are on your homepage, or maybe we may even need to dig into your CRM, your customer relationship management system, to learn a little bit more about your most successful, happiest clients. But when we do that, we're essentially looking for some common themes. We're looking for some commonalities, because in order to grow your business, we have to know where you've been successful already. If you have a brand new business, then we're going to run some experiments and try to find out who the best clients are based on, typically for that kind of company, it would be because you more than likely were providing data center network infrastructure to a data center operator or an enterprise data center owner operator or something like that in the past. And now you're starting up your own firm. But as long as your firm is already established, more than likely with some case studies, some logos, some CRM history to go on. And what we want to try to figure out is where you've been most successful. Who are the happiest clients? Who has the smoothest onboarding experience? How do they get through initial value, intended value, extended value? Who's got the greatest referral capacity, the referral potential? Where we've been most successful with cross-selling and upselling and growing these accounts over time. So we're doing a lot of digging into the intersection of marketing, sales, and account management. And some network infrastructure companies, this may be called customer success, coming a little more from the SaaS worlds. What we're essentially trying to figure out is, what do these clients have in common? Geographically, where are they located? Because we're trying to essentially document your ideal client profile, your ICP. So what do they all have in common? Are they in a certain metro area? Are they all within a certain state or province? Are they all within a certain country, a group of countries, a continent? Or are you truly able to sell data center network infrastructure consulting services on a global basis? For most companies, probably 95, 97, 98% of companies, you probably don't have the ability to sell data center network infrastructure consulting globally. More than likely, you have a certain amount of talent in your company that is located in certain geographic regions. And that's probably more than likely where you're providing most of these consulting services. That's not to say that you couldn't recruit people that have like a 50% or an 80% or 100% travel requirement. But for the most part, it usually, for a professional services firm like that, has to do with where your offices are physically located, where your employees are physically located. And then there's certain issues that come up with like licensing and compliance and certifications that may be unique to specific geographic regions that make you especially well suited or especially not suited or not qualified to do business in those particular regions. There's also language issues that can come up in doing business internationally. Like, for example, if your whole team only speaks English, there may be certain countries where it's just a non-starter to if you don't have team members that are bilingual or multilingual. So it's way beyond just localizing the website and localizing the marketing and sales enablement materials. It's being able to deliver services in those languages. So geographically, where have you been most successful? Second, let's get real about what company sizes are a good fit for your company. In other words, like because you're in data center infrastructure, you probably spend a lot of time talking about kilowatts and megawatts and density and square footage and square meters. But the reality is, when it comes to growth plans, when it comes to your sales and marketing strategy, when it comes to your go-to-market playbook, you're probably at some point going to hit a prospecting database. Could be like LinkedIn Sales Navigator. It could be Zoom Info. And in those databases, geography helps to narrow things down. Company size helps to narrow things down. And your company size more than likely needs to be normalized or standardized by number of employees at that particular company. And where the pedal hits the metal on your growth plans with all of this is trying to figure out, what's the minimum size a potential client needs to be a good fit to afford your minimums. And at the upper end of the range, at what point does a prospect or a client become so large that it would overwhelm your company's ability to be able to cost effectively deliver based on the talent and the expertise that you have today? So for a lot of companies that are in data center and network infrastructure consulting, it might be that, okay, you set a floor where like the company needs to have at least 50 employees. They need to be doing 5 or 10 million in annual revenue, or your local currency equivalent. And maybe you do really well up until the company gets to the point that it has 5,000 employees, at which point their requirements, the sales cycle length, insurance, financial issues, travel issues, whatever, a whole host of issues make it far less likely that they're going to be a good fit for you. So maybe it's literally as broad of a range where they can have as few as 50 employees and as many as 5,000 employees. So that's the second big attribute of your ideal client profile. The third big attribute is, are there certain industries, certain vertical markets, certain business models where your company is better suited to grow your business than others? And again, we're looking at the case studies. We're looking at where you've been most successful in the past geographically, at certain company sizes, and in certain business models. Because as I mentioned just a few moments ago, depending on where your clients are located and what industries, what verticals, what business models they're in, there may be some compliance or certification issues that pop up that make your company especially well suited or immediately disqualified to be able to work with those kinds of clients. So we'll document your ideal client profile. We next need to know, in these companies, who are the most important stakeholders that need to know you exist, that you need to educate and build trust with and stay with throughout their full, potentially lengthy buyer's journey that they may go through in between complete stranger and purchase decision for data center network infrastructure consulting. And we need to be realistic that there are some edge cases where this could be an emergency or an impulse buy. But for the vast majority of your prospects and clients, you probably have a considered sales cycle that could be anywhere from a couple of weeks to several months. And we now live in this world where so many buyers' journeys are now self-driven, are now self-guided. Like 10 years ago, if we were having this conversation, if I was answering this question, you could count on the fact that most of your prospects and clients would get about halfway through their journey, halfway through their buyer's journey, halfway through researching, comparing options and evaluating pricing. And they would hit, like, at the time, the number was 56%. They'd get to 56% of the way through this journey, and they'd be ready to meet with someone from your sales team. They'd be ready for potentially vendor contact. Add 10 years of digital transformation onto that, add millions of baby boomers retiring and a lot more millennials and Gen Zs in decision-making roles, add millions of people working from home for the first few years of the 2020s. And we now live in a world where the days of getting to spend half of the buyer's journey with your prospects and clients are long, long gone. Now, Gartner's latest research found that 83% of a typical buyer's journey is now over before sales contact, before vendor contact. 83%. So if you like sports analogies, imagine that your company was schmoozing, whining and dining, taking a group of channel partners and potential clients to a football match, to a soccer game, to a basketball game. And because the stadium and the league is really not a big fan of salespeople, despite the fact that you're paying for this really expensive, gorgeous, lavishly catered suite to entertain your channel partners and prospects and clients and employees, if you have sales anywhere on your business card, on your LinkedIn profile, on your email signature, they're not going to allow you into the arena. They're not going to allow you into the stadium till you're deep into the fourth quarter of the game. Literally 3/4 of the game is going to be over before you're allowed in. You'd say, Joshua, that seems ridiculous. We're the ones paying for this lavish experience. How could they block us? Well, they're in the driver's seat. By the way, if you like baseball analogies, same issue, but you're not allowed into the stadium till the 8th inning. This is what's unfortunately happening with a lot of traditional marketing and sales playbooks, is you're being completely excluded from all of these critical early and middle stage conversations when someone else is having the opportunity to educate and build trust with the future clients that you want so badly. That other company, those other individuals are getting a chance to frame the criteria that they're ultimately going to use when they get to the decision stage and they're ready for a sales related conversation. Typically 28 different touch points happen between complete stranger and purchase decision. 2/3, 3/4 of those happen before you're even aware that a prospect or client exists and has this serious need. The only way typically to get in early and often, to be invited into their side of the table, is for your sales team, your SDRs, your sales development reps, your account executives to undergo a radical makeover, to upgrade their positioning. So instead of being seen by their traditional account executive, sales development rep kind of titles, they're now showing up more like a consultant, a teacher, a trusted advisor, a subject matter expert on anything and everything having to do with data center network infrastructure. This changes the nature of who you hire. This changes the nature of how you do onboarding, professional development, upskilling, cross-training. These are all incredibly important now because your prospects and clients no longer need someone to show up and read your website to them. There's probably a really good explainer video on your website that does exactly that. And if for some reason you missed the memo on that kind of content asset for the last 10 years, rest assured, most of your direct competitors will have those videos on their website. So someone that doesn't want to read the text can click a button and have it read to them with good emotions, body language, visuals, all that stuff to make it very engaging for the kind of person that prefers to watch and listen instead of read. So no one needs your SDR and your AE to show up and do that work anymore. They also don't need them to show up and read static slides. Same basic issue. You can take those static slides and make a great multimedia version of what's on your website and embed it with a nice big play button on your website. And for most of the people that are in that first 83%, they don't want to talk to a member of your sales team quite yet. They're not ready. They want to get the self-service version. And it works out well too, because in many cases, your best prospects and clients are probably doing this research and doing all of this homework on some pretty non-traditional hours. Some of them may be working the exact same hours that your SDRs and your AEs work, that 40, 50, 60-hour window, but there's 168 hours in a week. Unless you have round-the-clock coverage, there's a really good chance that some great prospects are going to land on your website after hours, on the weekend, on a holiday weekend, and there's going to be no one around that could talk to them for potentially 48 hours, 72 hours, whatever it is, but they're super interested in figuring out how they're going to address some of their big network infrastructure goals or some of the things that are driving them nuts about their current network infrastructure. And the better your self-service, self-guided resources are at being able to pull someone in, earn your way in, get them to say, that's pretty interesting. What else do they have to say? Oh, there's an on-demand webinar about this. Oh, I can book a free needs assessment. Oh, there's a downloadable planning guide about this. And if you have done a really good job of understanding your ideal client profile and your buyer persona's biggest goals and challenges, there's an excellent chance that a significant amount of the people that land on your website will end up staying for several minutes or longer and consume the heck out of all of this great content. The more great, helpful content that you have, the more you can be a really good job of anticipating what they want to know next and proactively suggesting those next steps, the more likely it is that they're going to spend more time in your world. And that's the name of the game. We need to completely dominate and crush the surface area on as many of those 28 touch points as possible. And a very natural extension of that is they will hit a certain point where they're like, oh, that's really interesting. They're having a webinar on data center network infrastructure best practices next Thursday. That sounds pretty good. Sign me up. And they sign up for your webinar and they hit your confirmation page. And oh, people that are interested in data center network infrastructure are also often very interested in our free data center network infrastructure needs analysis consultation. Sign up here. So you've gone from someone being an initial impressed visitor on your website to someone saying, I'm willing to spend 30 minutes in a training context with you next Thursday to learn more about best practices. And I'm so interested that I'm also going to book time for some one-on-one time with someone on your team to do a needs assessment. Talk about sales cycle acceleration. If that asset, if that thought process, if that value proposition of educating and building trust doesn't exist, none of that initial lead generation, none of that sales cycle acceleration can happen. So for a company that wants to grow its data center network infrastructure consulting business, not only do you need to understand who the company is, you need to understand who are the typical people on these decision committees. Who is your most important kind of stakeholder that you work with initially during the sales process and post-purchase? Who's the second most important kind of stakeholder in that kind of company? The most important economic stakeholder we'll call your primary buyer persona. The second most important kind of stakeholder we might call a secondary buyer persona. In the case of network infrastructure consulting, maybe it's a IT infrastructure executive. In the case of a secondary buyer persona, maybe it's a CTO, maybe it's a CFO, Maybe it's a director of network engineering. It'll vary depending on your business model and your target audience. But that's the thought process that I would recommend, is think through who these stakeholders are, who typically shows up on the decision committee. How can we get really specific about who they are? And next, we need to understand what they care about. Not what we'd like them to care about, but what they actually do care about in their own words. And the way we figure out what they actually care the most about in their own words is we don't guess, we don't wing it. We don't just talk to Bob and Sally, who've been on your sales team since the Ronald Reagan administration in the 1980s and have, quote unquote, all of the answers about all of this. We take Bob and Sally's input and we're like, that's useful. And then we go out and we still get the other 75, 80% of the input by talking to real IT infrastructure executives, real CTOs, real whoever it is in your buyer personas, and get their own words about what their biggest goals and challenges are. Not what we think the words are, but what those words actually are. Ideally, face-to-face interviews. Second best would be video interviews. Third best would be surveys, lead intelligence, and studying their search and social footprint. How do they describe themselves on LinkedIn? What kinds of content and events do they interact with? How do they talk? What do they talk about? And again, we need to find the consensus, the top 5 or 10 bullet points on their biggest professional goals that they need to achieve, that their team needs to achieve, that their company needs to achieve, that are related to data center network infrastructure. And then the flip side of that is we need to know what's driving them nuts. What is screwing up their work-life balance? What is stressing them out to no end? What's ruining their time off with their family, friends, and loved ones? And what not only is the consensus on the biggest network infrastructure challenges or frustrations, but how do they describe those and how do they rank those? Because once we have that incredibly valuable information from the standpoint of your primary and your secondary, perhaps a tertiary, third most important economic stakeholder, then we need to build our content strategy, our website copywriting, our product marketing, our sales enablement, our educational events. Everything needs to be focusing on taking that information and using it with amazing precision to educate and build trust with the people that matter most in these companies. And the better job we do at executing with that, the more they want to spend time with you. And that's the superhero. That's the superpower, is getting it so your prospects and clients actually want to spend time with members of your client-facing team, as opposed to you having to chase and beg and manipulate, cajole, whatever it is to try to get that magic 15-minute meeting on the calendar so you can come in and pitch. 15 minutes isn't going to cut it. If we don't meet them till the absolute end, it's too late. Someone else, a direct competitor, an indirect competitor, a non-business model competitor, someone else stacked the decks very much in that company's favor because you didn't arrive early, because you didn't arrive often, because you severely underestimated how much upfront research, self-directed research that they were going to do on their own. Those 28 touch points are incredibly important. All too often, companies in the data center ecosystem, including network infrastructure, spend a ton of their annual budget on global and national conferences, attending, exhibiting, sponsoring really expensive golf tournaments and cabana parties. And some of those can be effective if you get the targeting perfect. If you've looked at the conference organizers' media kit and your ideal client profile, and there's a really good match. But a lot of times it's an extraordinarily expensive touch point. And the problem is, just because you spent tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars on those touch points, you don't get extra credit for them. Your ideal clients, your buyer personas, are still going to go through 25 or 30 different touch points. So you still need a way to stay with them long after that event has happened, that's way beyond just nagging them to try to get a sales meeting booked. Because there's a big gap often between that initial contact and when they're ready for a sales conversation. And the ones that are earning their way in are showing up with the right people in the right places at the right time, and most of all, in the right context. So they're seen more as teachers and consultants and far less like commission-hungry salespeople. So that's the playbook. Those are the best practices that I think you should be thinking about for growing a data center network infrastructure consulting business. Next question up is also related to data center infrastructure. How do we increase data center infrastructure sales? So how do we increase data center infrastructure sales. So more than likely in this kind of context, you're doing some kind of lead generation, but maybe you don't have enough qualified leads, and maybe there's a lot of leads that aren't advancing. So rather than just focusing on net new leads, I want to look at your existing leads, your existing opportunities, and try to figure out how to get more of those to accelerate to later deal stages, and some of them to accelerate to such late deal stages that they get to closed won, WON, and that you have a net new customer and a new source of revenue. So we actually are increasing sales. Typically, the way to go about increasing that sales velocity is to get a lot more clear about who they are, what they care about, and how you're doing your segmentation and personalization. In other words, we need to know among your existing leads, among your existing sales opportunities, how similar are they to each other and how different are they from each other? And what's top of mind for each of those? When we look at their buyer personas, what are their biggest data center infrastructure objectives? What's in their OKRs, objectives and key results, that has to do with data center infrastructure that we desperately need to find the answers about to figure out how we can actually help them? Diagnostic, exploratory, I don't care, whatever you call it, but more than likely, you're not going to get to see behind the curtain with that particular prospect unless they trust you. And trust is the first cousin of branding. Stay in the digital first world that we now live in, and the self-directed buyer's journey, where most of the research and decision making is happening without you being in the room. The concept of branding and data centers, branding digital infrastructure, branding critical facilities is so different today than it was as recently as 10 years ago. 10 years ago, when it came to your brand, it was something that your creative director owned. And they had to have 5 PhDs in Adobe Creative Suite to be able to get near anything having to do with your brand. And sure, even today, your hexadecimal colors matter, your logo matters, your font matters. Sure, you need consistency, but it's no longer anywhere near sufficient. Your brand today is now everything that the marketplace says about your company when you're not in the room. And a self-driven buyer's journey, where you're excluded from nearly all of these early and middle stage conversations, your brand is everything that data center stakeholders, digital infrastructure buyers, critical facilities, ecosystems, what they're saying about your company and your team members when you're not in the room. And given that you're hardly in the room for any of the buyer's journey anymore, you're typically excluded for the first 83% of this, how you present online for that self-driven buyer's journey is incredibly important. How you reposition your sales team to be able to show up more as teachers, consultants, subject matter experts, trusted advisors, and some of them even as thought leaders is incredibly important to be able to earn your way back in. But most of all, we need to know exactly who they are, what they care about, and figure out a way to win our way in, to educate and build trust with those prospects, with those future clients in their incredibly formative years. They say kids have incredibly informative years. Your prospects have formative years as well, that are happening in the awareness and the consideration stages of their buyer's journey that happen well before that 83% point. And the more you can earn your way in to have a major role in many of those 28 touch points, the more surface area you have, the more they want to spend time with members of your client-facing team, the less time and attention they have to spend with your competition. So it is for sure a competitive battleground. It is for sure an area where you need to be paying a lot of attention to your differentiation that happens in the early and the middle stages of the journey, in the early and middle stages of the sales cycle, not just at the end of the journey, not just at the end of the sales cycle. So from a tactical perspective, what does this look like? Getting better at the buyer personas, getting better at segmentation, lead segmentation in your database, better email nurturing, better email marketing in general. That's contextual for who they are and where they are in their life cycle with your company. There's so many companies that are prematurely proposing marriage to their prospects. In the same way that most people that go to look to buy a new car or lease a new car or buy a new home or rent a home or an office or a condo or something like that, in the same way that most people on the very first visit aren't at the decision stage, So many people still in data centers and digital infrastructure set up their whole process and their website as if they're assuming that everyone is going to buy today. Everyone's ready to elope on the first date. You go run to the chapel in Las Vegas and you met 30 minutes ago and now you're married. Funny Ashton Kutcher movie, right? But not so funny when it comes to finding great clients for long-term enterprise data center related needs, digital infrastructure kinds of needs. So from a realistic standpoint, we need to understand the typical steps that a certain kind of buyer goes through between complete stranger and purchase decision. So let's say we're mapping an IT infrastructure executive, an IT infrastructure manager that's looking to buy data center infrastructure. What are the 28 touch points that they go through? This is part of your buyer persona research. Your buyer's journey mapping is figuring out at a macro level, the 3, 4, 5 really big steps, and then the interim steps that they go through. Because the better job you can do at understanding the pattern recognition, having that muscle memory about what an IT infrastructure cares about at step 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way through step 28, the more you can proactively and helpfully suggest what someone in this kind of company, in this kind of job, in this geographic region, at this company size is going to want to know next. That's an incredibly important driver of having a super successful confirmation page strategy on your lead generation offers. It's an incredibly important part of having effective email nurturing, email workflow nurturing, email automation, whatever you want to call it, that educates and builds trust and accelerates people to the next logical step. In order to pull that off, obviously, you have to have some expertise. Otherwise, there's no reason for them to want to spend time with you. And you need to have a really strong sense of who you're selling to, who you're marketing to, who you're servicing, what they care most about, and the steps that they go through that are potentially a couple of weeks to a couple of months ahead of an ultimate purchase decision. And when we can do a good job of nearly monopolizing those 28 touch points, so they're spending a ridiculous amount of time with members of your team, we're going to win by default many times, most of the time, because you're not only nearly guaranteed to stay on the short list, in many cases, you may be a very, very short list by the time they get to the decision stage. Like you're literally the last company on the short list and you win by default. They may not tell you that because they want to be hard, what's about negotiating. But the reality is when you spend so much time with multiple people on that decision committee and you're helping to drive alignment long before they get to the stage where they're ready for vendor contact, you've already done amazing things. In a lot of ways, most people in enterprise tech have come to the conclusion that the future of account executives is a lot more about guiding your best prospects through their purchasing decision than selling. It's a lot more about being a very effective project manager that helps your internal champion drive alignment across their team and other teams within their organization, like the quarterback, the orchestra conductor, the project aligner in chief. It's such a different world than it was as recently as 5-10 years ago. And that's all the more reason why when it comes to like your educational events, whether these are in-person lunch and learns, breakfast seminars, webinars, live streams, there's a really, really important role for your AEs and your SDRs to play in that. And so many people are missing this enormous opportunity. Your AEs and your SDRs do not need to be super deep subject matter experts to be able to add value. They need to understand the industry. They need to have access to other subject matter experts that they can pull in from your company, from vendors that you work with, from channel partners, from clients. And they could be fantastic concierges, tour guides, panel moderators, all of the above. But there's still a lot of people in these SDR and AE roles who refuse to acknowledge how much the journey has changed. And because of that, when I talk with people about this, they're like, oh yeah, that webinar stuff, that event stuff, like, let marketing do that. They've always done that. Marketing you need to collaborate with marketing to build your brand and gain that surface area with the prospects and clients that you want to build a relationship with. So the collaboration, the teamwork, the alignment is more important than it has ever been. And marketing conversely needs to be prepared to go much deeper into the journey, which is why the days of marketing being buried under the sales team and the org chart has really seen its better days and is definitely not serving your clients and prospects well. It's definitely not serving your customers well, it's not serving your business's overall need well, because not only does your sales team need marketing support, your account managers, your product managers, your channel partner managers, even your HR team needs marketing related support. They all need content, they all need videos, they all need webinars, they all need all of these assets to be successful in the self-driven buyer's journey. It's just a matter of like figuring out how to make sure that you get people at the right org chart levels within your company. So at the end of the day, for increasing data center infrastructure sales, we need to know who they are. We need to know what they care about and be able to have such unique expertise, such educational value that they actually want to spend a lot of their journey with you. And the better job you can do with changing your company culture to draw a line in the sand and say, hey, look, we're tired of getting treated like crap by our prospects. We're tired of being marginalized. We're tired of being haggled down to the point where we're losing money. We can't grow a business that way. We have really, really smart people with tons of valuable expertise in our industry, and they can't be the best kept secret anymore. So going forward, and these going forward initiatives, mandates, whatever you want to call them, proclamations, usually needs to come from the CEO level in a small to mid-sized company. And an enterprise, if you have tens of thousands of employees, maybe your chief commercial or chief revenue officer or something like that leads the charge on this. But like going forward, we're going to draw a line in the sand, and we need to make sure in our geographic region with companies this size in these particular industries, we need to make sure that they are certain that our company is the be all end all expert when it comes to anything and everything having to do with digital infrastructure. We don't necessarily need to have global domination and across all size companies and across all industries, but for our ICP, our ideal client profile, for a certain geographic region, for certain company sizes, for certain industries and certain stakeholders within those industries, they need to know that we are like in beast mode when it comes to having this incredibly deep bench of talent and expertise around anything and everything having to do with data center infrastructure. And the better job you do with that, the more it's setting yourself up for success with increasing your data center infrastructure sales. So that's how I would approach the big picture question of how you can increase your data center infrastructure sales. Next question up is, how do we find data center leads? How do we find data center leads? Okay, so the number one problem that I see in data center related companies, digital infrastructure, and critical facilities is a lack of a common definition among different stakeholders in the company, especially across marketing and sales, about what a lead actually is. From a marketer standpoint, your lead is often someone that you did a badge scan with at a conference, or that dropped the business card in a fishbowl if it's a really old school conference, or someone that filled out a form on your website. It's a known contact from potentially a known company if you have the right kind of technology in place to be getting mostly company email addresses as opposed to free email addresses. But a lead is just a known identified person who may at some point have some interest in speaking with your sales team. From a AE standpoint, from an SDR standpoint, a sales professional thinks that every lead is ready to talk to them, if only. The reality is a lead that's been educated and had enough trust built with your company that they're ready to talk with a salesperson is usually considered an early stage opportunity. To get from that path to lead to opportunity, what typically is happening in your MarTech stack and your marketing technology stack and your sales technology stack and your CRM, your customer relationship management, is a lead is typically getting nurtured and had enough education and trust building touch points happening that marketing declares that they're qualified. They're called an MQL, or a marketing qualified lead, meaning that based on a pre-agreed definition of fit and interest, marketing is confident that it's time to hand off that lead to someone from your sales team for a human review from your sales team. So the pre-agreed definition of what marketing gives themselves a high five about is usually that particular lead comes from your ideal client profile, meaning they're in the right geographic region, they're from a company that's the right size, and they're from potentially the right kind of industry. That's the fit. And then the level of interest is that either they're consuming a ton of content, they've attended a webinar, they've attended a group demo, or they've filled out a form. They're literally a hand raiser that says, I am ready to talk to sales. In today's hyper-competitive, hyper-cynical data center infrastructure marketplace, most people have gotten way past the point where anyone's filling out a form anymore that says talk to sales, but they're filling out the first cousin of that. Schedule a tour, schedule a free consultation, schedule a free needs assessment, book a demo, something like that. So given all of that gets your marketing team to say, okay, we have an MQL, a marketing qualified lead, then a human from your sales team, a lot of times a sales development rep, an SDR or business development rep, reviews that lead and says, yeah, that looks pretty good. They've read a lot of the right web pages. They've attended some of our events. They're from the right size company in the right geographic region. I am going to take that and I'm going to stamp it as sales qualified, and it's going to get auto assigned or manually assigned for one of our account executives to pursue. And then you have a very, very early stage opportunity at that point with maybe a 5 or 10% likely to close based on how early that person is before someone has met with them. Then when someone from your sales team, like an account executive, meets with that person, then they can better qualify what the need is, better get to the point where maybe there's an estimated close date, maybe there's an estimated deal size, and slowly but surely that opportunity may start to progress across the deals board. So until you're having these conversations with multiple stakeholders from your team and getting down in a PDF or your wiki or whatever it is, or your CRM, a very clear definition on the difference between leads and opportunities, you will continue to struggle to have productive working relationships across different members of your team that are in these different kinds of roles. So first thing is get on the same page about what a lead actually is. Second, we need to recognize that just because you acquired a list doesn't make it a lead anymore. It didn't really make it a lead so much 5 or 10 years ago either. All it was is, okay, you have a person and we're going to plan on doing some outbound. We may do some account-based marketing. We may try to get them to attend an event that's incredibly relevant for who they are, the company they work for, and what we think they will likely care about. But that more than likely is not a sales opportunity, and it may not even be a lead, because until you've done that initial touch point, they have no idea that your company exists, right? So first impressions, of course, matter. There's far too many people in this industry that are proposing marriage on the first date, that are prematurely, obsessively trying to book sales meetings when they haven't yet established that there's any fit or there's any interest. The goal with all of this is to try to get the right people from the right companies to spend more time with members of your client-facing team in an education, trust-building kind of context. So if we think about the kind of touch points that you can have and kind of put them on a spectrum, like someone visiting your booth at a conference and they trust the conference organizer, and by extension, some of that trust is transferred to your company, that certainly is helping, but it doesn't help nearly as much as that same exact person coming to a session at that conference, coming to a keynote at that conference where a key member on your team was educating and building trust the audience. And the first cousin of that is our webinars and live streams, because you can do those all the time and you don't need to make huge financial investments or huge carbon producing type of hits to be able to actually make that step forward. So when it comes to finding data center leads, let's get really clear on your ideal client profile. Let's know geographically where these leads should be. Let's know from what size companies they should be. And let's know what industries where we think you can win the best, where you can provide the most value to them. Once you have that ideal client profile defined, then you should be able to build out a target account list that drives what's often called ABM, or account-based marketing. This is a list of anywhere from a couple dozen, maybe a couple hundred, it could be up to a couple thousand potential companies that look like they would be a perfect fit for, at some point, doing business with you for your data center related products and services. So once we have clarity on who the company is, we have a couple dozen to a couple thousand potential companies that we've built onto our target company list that we think we should build a relationship with over time. Then we figure out who are the individuals within these companies that matter most, and we're going to categorize these into buyer personas. A buyer persona is a semi-fictional representation of an ideal client based on actual research and some select educated speculation. And the buyer personas are incredibly important to getting in inside their world, getting inside their mind of knowing what their top priorities are. What are their biggest professional goals? What's driving them nuts? What are their biggest challenges? And the better job we can do with aligning all of our messaging on our website, on our product marketing, on our sales enablement, on our email marketing, on our social media, on our premium content, on our events, everything should be aligned about what's top of mind for your most important, your primary buyer persona and your secondary buyer persona. And a better job you can do with that, the more you give them a reason to want to spend time with members of your client-facing team in an educational context. And that's the unlock with all of this. Too many people are putting out a lot of selfish content and assuming that everyone wants to sit through your infomercial. The reality is, until they're at the 80-85% point in their research and decision-making process, they don't even want to know that your company or your products exist. They just know that they have some big goals and some big challenges that they're figuring out. And they're looking for someone to help understand what some of the steps that they can take to close the gap on their goal attainment, or what some of the steps they can take to address some of these big challenges and stressors that are driving them nuts may possibly look like. So this is where we take our AEs, we take our sales development reps, our account executives and sales development reps, and we repurpose, we reframe them, we reprioritize, re-incentivize them to show up more as teachers and consultants so they can build these deep relationships with prospects and clients long before they're ready for vendor contact. So much to the point that they want to spend time with members of your client-facing team as opposed to you having to nag and beg for these kinds of things. So that's what a data center lead really looks like. A great lead is someone who has strong fit with your ideal client profile and strong interest. They're interested in what you're talking about. They're interested in your educational content and your events. And you can see tons of evidence in this in the contact record on their CRM. So the fit and the interest, that drives great leads. That's what gets account executives, sales development reps, sales leaders, VPs of sales, sales directors, chief revenue officers. That's what gets everyone excited that your data center leads are a leading indicator of sales opportunities and a leading indicator of net new clients, net new revenue. So that's how I would approach finding data center leads. And with that, we're going to take a real quick break for a message from our sponsor.
Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales marketing and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that's www.dcsmi.com. Now, back to Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A.
Hey there, Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI, the Data Center Sales and Marketing Institute. We are all about elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market professionals in the growth of the data center industry. And you're watching our weekly Q&A show, the Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A, where each week I tackle a handful of the biggest sales and marketing challenges that we're hearing about from all over the data center ecosystem. If you're getting good value from this week's show, make sure that you hit the like button. And if you have an idea for an upcoming topic that we should tackle in one of our future shows, please leave that as a comment wherever you're watching this video or wherever you're listening to this. So next up, the next question that we're going to address this week is, how do we get meetings for data center thermal risk mitigation and energy efficiency solutions? So your company provides thermal risk mitigation, basically the consequences of things overheating, right? And energy efficiency solutions. How do we get meetings for data center thermal risk mitigation and energy efficiency solutions? So first up, do you sell risk mitigation, thermal risk mitigation, and energy efficiency to the exact same clients, or are they different clients? Is it a different line of business? Depending on the nature of your products and services, it may be the exact same client. Depending on your product roadmap and how these were built and integrated together, they may be two different kinds of clients. First, you need to answer that, because that'll determine whether you just need one go-to-market playbook, one sales and marketing strategy, one potential team, or whether you need to potentially segment things. As long as you're able to sell your thermal risk mitigation services and your energy efficiency solution services to the exact same clients, then we need to understand where historically you've done best. There's probably some clues about this sitting on your case studies page and in the logos on your homepage. We'll probably find a lot more clues about that if we look into your CRM, your customer relationship management system. But we essentially need to know at a company level, where has your company historically done best with thermal risk mitigation and energy efficiency solutions? What do these companies have in common? Where are they located? How big or how small are they? And what kinds of industries are they in? Those become incredibly important for making sure that you're focused on getting the right meetings with the right people. So that gives us the 3 big parameters that we need to define our ideal client profile, or ICP. Then within those companies, we need to know who are the individuals that we need to educate and build trust with, that we need to create awareness with, that we want to motivate to want to spend a lot of time with members of our client-facing team. So it could be a facilities manager, it could be a ESG executive, it could be an innovation officer. There's a lot of different players in data center operators and enterprise IT kinds of environments that are interested in thermal related risk issues as well as energy efficiency solutions. So for your particular company, for your particular products and services, who's the most important kind of stakeholder? We'll call that person your primary decision maker, your primary buyer persona. And who's the second most important economic stakeholder who shows up on a decision committee? We'll call that person a secondary buyer persona. And then depending on the nature of how big or small these companies are, you may have a third category of person that shows up on your decision committees. We'll call that a tertiary buyer persona. You might over time as well come across a certain kind of person that when they show up in this process, it's like the kiss of death for your initiative moving forward. We'll call that a negative buyer persona because we want to try to actively navigate around that person and exclude them from meetings because they're a detractor. They're not on your side, to say the least. So with all of that in mind, when it comes to getting meetings, we just don't want any old meetings. We want meetings with the right people in the right places at the right time, and most of all, in the right context, so that they see your team and they see your company as the be-all, end-all experts when it comes to anything and everything having to do with data center thermal risk mitigation and energy efficiency solutions. And that's a pretty big ocean to boil if you're looking at this on a global level. But what I encourage you to do is to know where you're going to pick your battles. This is where your ideal client profile comes into play. In which geographic regions is your company best suited to deliver these services today? More than likely, you're going to have talent and offices in certain regions. You're going to have certain language capabilities in certain regions. You're going to have certain expertise and licensing and compliance related to this in certain kind of regions. So geographically, where are you doing business? Where are these clients located where you need to book these meetings? Second, how big or small? What's the minimum size that a company needs to be to afford your minimum level of engagement? Can a company with 10 employees? Can a company with 50 employees? How big do they need to be? Do they need to have 200 employees, 500 employees? How big do they need to be to afford your minimum level of engagement for thermal risk mitigation and energy efficiency? Again, only you can answer that question, but it's definitely a question worth asking when it comes to targeting, whether you're targeting outbound, whether you're targeting ads, inbound, whatever you're doing with account-based marketing. It's incredibly important to know the minimum size that a company needs to be for that meeting to be with someone from a company where you're on the right track, where they can afford your entry level program. Conversely, at the extreme upper end of the range, is there a point where a company could be so large that it just would be overwhelming for your team today based on perhaps that company's legal requirements, compliance requirements, financial requirements, sales cycle length, number of stakeholders, capability, physical locations, a host of factors. So can you truly do business with a company that has tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of employees? Or do you max out at somewhere like 1,000 employees or 5,000 employees or something like that? So again, only you can answer that question based on historically where you've done best and where your clients have gotten the most value. But for sure, when it comes to booking better meetings, you must be able to answer those questions like Goldilocks, not too hot, not too cold, not too big, not too small. And then third, are there certain industries that are more conducive to having these great meetings, having these great conversations about thermal risk mitigation and energy efficiency that align with your roadmap, that align with what you can deliver today, that align with your existing talent and your existing expertise. So that's your ideal client profile. There's buyer personas. There's an account-based marketing, a target list, target company list that you can build with a couple dozen, a couple hundred, maybe a couple thousand companies that would be a good fit for this. But if you're thinking of meetings, what I'd encourage you to think about is the self-directed buyer's journey that most of your buyers now go through today. It used to be like 10 years ago, your buyers would be willing to meet with someone from your sales team when they were about halfway through the research and decision-making process. Those days are long gone. We have all the baby boomers retiring, a lot more Gen Z, a lot more millennials in decision-making role, millions of people working from home at the start of the pandemic, a decade of digital transformation, all of these factors adding up to the point where Gartner's latest research found that 83% of a typical buyer's journey is now over before sales contact. In other words, they've gotten like 83% of the way through their research and comparing options and decision making before you get to meet them. If you keep doing the things the way that you've always done them, if you keep showing up as the same kind of vendor, as the same kind of traditional account executive or marketer like you did 10 years ago. The only unlock that gets you in early and often is one in which you're able to flip the switch to no longer be seen as a vendor, to no longer be relegated into the vendor box, but instead having those same team members on your client-facing team now show up more as teachers, as consultants, as subject matter experts, as trusted advisors. And some of your most senior members of your client-facing team may even be able to successfully be seen as thought leaders in your space when it comes to anything and everything having to do with thermal risk mitigation and energy efficiency. So when we do this the right way, your clients, your future clients, your prospects actually want to spend time with members of your team. What does that look like in practice? In many cases, it's educational resources, it's educational events. And historically, these are initiatives that sales has punted over to marketing. Marketing can't do this by themselves. Sales can't do this by themselves. The collaborations are incredibly important. So sales professionals need to be prepared to come in much earlier in journeys than they ever have in the past. And conversely, because often the initial sale is really just the beginning in any kind of repeat sale or recurring context, marketers need to be prepared to go much deeper into the journey than they've ever had in the past. So shoving marketing under your sales organization is no longer a good outcome. For marketing, it's no longer a good outcome for your company, for your prospect experience, for your customer experience. The kind of content and events that marketing produces, your account managers need that, your product managers need that, your channel partnership organization for sure needs that, HR needs that. So there's some org chart alignment issues that a lot of times get discussed around the same time with this as well. But what I would encourage you to think of as meetings is in the early and middle stages of the journey. They don't want to do one-on-one high pressure sales meetings. They don't want to be qualified, but they do in many cases need a lot of education. And they need a lot of like, okay, you understand, you've recognized the patterns, you have the muscle memory on what a company in a certain geographic area that's a certain size in a certain industry and with these stakeholders, what they care about at different stages of the journey, from step 1 all the way through to step 28, from awareness to consideration to decision. And the better job you can do with proactively providing these resources, the more likely they're going to see you as a true consultant and an expert. In a lot of cases, the most successful initiatives lean on educational events. These educational events could be webinars, they could be live streams. You could go on a roadshow and hit all the major cities where your potential prospects and clients are located. If you have a very forward-thinking conference producer, they may allow you to have educational events that benefit you and what you're trying to do as opposed to just their objectives. But if you're trying to keep this relatively low cost, if you're trying to keep this very high impact, if your company is primarily doing business with clients in your local geographic area or geographic areas where there's a high degree of proximity to where your company has an office or a facility, meaning that most of your prospects and clients can drive to where you're located, you're within a half hour to an hour drive, an enormous opportunity is to take what you learn about these companies, what you learn about these buyer personas and their biggest goals and challenges, and create an educational event calendar. 12 events, 1 event a month, a lunch and learn or breakfast seminar, something similar to like that, where you invite your ideal prospects, your ideal clients, your core buyer personas to come down to your facility and learn together. And sometimes a speaker is one of your internal subject matter experts. Sometimes it's a subject matter expert from a vendor or a company that you partner with. Sometimes it's clients and you're moderating a panel. It's a really strong power play to have your prospects get to meet your clients, right? But overall, what we're looking to do is we're looking to get your prospects and clients to see your company as educators, as experts, and be highly motivated to want to spend time with you learning. And when this works really well, what you tend to find is prospects and clients bring their coworkers, bring their boss with them, because teams that learn together grow together. So instead of having to solve these really thorny alignment decision committee issues when you're 80%, 90% of the way through the buyer's journey, you're already starting to win over the decision committee because multiple stakeholders from that same company are registering and attending your offline and online events and learning about this particular topic, 2, 3, 4 people from the same company. So when we think about meetings, the real reframe is to rethink what a meeting actually is. If you have a target account and you can get 2, 3, 4 people that matter from that company all coming to an event together, all coming from a webinar together, holy crap, are you accelerating your sales cycle and accelerating the know, like, and trust and educating and building trust with them to the point where you're nearly, in that kind of context, you're nearly guaranteed to stay on the short list all the way to the end. And in many cases, if you're doing this as like a monthly series and multiple people from the same company are you coming to a monthly series, just be a little patient. Unless they're like extremely narcissistic and pulling the wool over your eyes, you're almost certainly winning them over. And when they start to bring more people each time and they're like, could you just come on site and do this lunch and learn for us, for our entire team? You'll have all the 15, 20 people in the room that matter. Like, when we talk about being able to sit on their side of the table when it comes to being seen more as a trusted advisor and getting the inside scoop about what's really going on, this is what a meeting is all about, is using these educational interactions, using these educational events to stack the decks enormously in your company's favor of being able to help these prospects, these future clients, understand how others just like them have navigated these. And you're having a massive impact on the criteria that they use to evaluate all of the different options, all of your competitors that are going to be looked at throughout this full journey. And by getting in early and often, you really, really, really tip the scales in your favor. So when they're finally ready for that quote unquote sales meeting at the end of the journey there, where they're ready to talk about a sales context, like in many cases, the short list is collapsed down to the point where your company is the short list. You essentially have won. They may not tell you that outright if they're trying to be hardball negotiators with the whole thing. But the reality is, when you start, of those 28 touch points between complete stranger and purchase decision, when you've had multiple stakeholders that have consumed, enjoyed, experienced 6, 8, 10, 12 of those touch points with your company already, what do you say? It's like shooting fish in a barrel, right? Like, so when it comes to getting more of the right meetings for data center thermal risk mitigation and energy efficiency solutions, know who's the company that you can best serve, who are the stakeholders within those companies that care the most about thermal risk mitigation and energy efficiency, what's top of mind for the most important kind of stakeholders, and what can you do to add outrageous amounts of educational value to those decision committee members on an extended basis, not just over a period of a couple of weeks, but over several months, so you completely saturate those 28 touch points, completely saturate the surface area when it comes to anything and everything that they want to know about thermal risk mitigation, as well as energy efficiency solutions. The better job you can do with that, the more those meetings become like, hey, we've already decided on your company. Just tell us, what we need to do. We're bought in. We're ready to make this a reality. So that's the key to having more effective meetings, is to redefine what a meeting actually is, because a meeting today is so different than it was 10, 20, 30 years ago. Everyone thinks if they can just get introduced to the magic decision maker, that all the dominoes will fall into place. No, it doesn't work like that. You can get a meeting with the CEO. It could be your brother-in-law, or a personal recommendation or something like that, or sister-in-law. And everyone's gotten so risk averse. No one wants to make a decision on their own anymore. So even if you manage to get that initial magic meeting, they're going to kick it back to their team members, their direct reports, and you're going to still need to go and build consensus with them. So when we become really realistic about the self-driven buyer's journey, how complex these decisions are, the alignment that needs to happen across different stakeholders within different teams and your client sites, and you realize that a huge part of your role is helping to support your internal champion to drive that internal alignment, both before, during, and after the sales process, so they become a pleasure for your account managers to work with, as opposed to the opposite. All of this strongly favors someone in your C-suite say, look, going forward, we are tired of being shoved in the vendor box. We're tired of our prospects and clients treating us like crap. Going forward, we're going to make certain that everything we do is about demonstrating extreme topical expertise in this geographic area for these size companies and these kinds of industries, for these kinds of stakeholders, when it comes to anything and everything having to do with data center thermal risk mitigation and energy efficiency solutions. Next question up is, how do we sell data center operations, optimization, and compliance? How do we sell data center operations, optimization, and compliance? So we need to know what are the right companies for us, and then we need to know who these stakeholders are within a company that we care the most about. Typically, when it comes to operations, fortunately, there's not a lot of mystery or shrouding who these folks are when it comes to data centers, because they usually have the word operations right in their job title. And when it's really simple, it could be technology operations, it could be network operations center, NOC, or something like that. But almost certainly there's the word operations or ops that's sitting on a job title in their email signature, on their LinkedIn profile, whatever you're doing with managing your prospects and your future clients. So essentially what we need to do is understand like where you can win, where you can serve best in terms of where they're located, how big or how small the company is. Are there certain industries that you're better suited to work with than others because of compliance and certification issues that may come up in that particular geographic region? And then like, who are the key people that we need to educate and build trust with when it comes to operations, optimization, and compliance? And of course, for compliance, it's also many times super easy because there's someone that has the word compliance in their job title: compliance manager, compliance executive, governance, risk, and compliance. First cousin of ESG in some cases. So how do we get our mind around all of this? How do we sell them? Well, we don't sell them the same way we did 10 years ago because people don't buy the same way that they did 10 years ago. Everyone's just doing so much research on their own before they ever get to you that there's a really good chance that if you're not well prepared going into those initial meetings, you may completely miss out on the fact that they're really far along by the time you meet them. And because they're really far along by the time you meet them, they may have a PhD or MBA level education that they've given themselves on your topic area, on operations, optimization, and compliance. So this changes the nature of who you hire. It changes the nature of how you do onboarding, professional development, upskilling, cross-training, how you build your teams with different levels of subject matter expertise, who does what, because no one needs you to read the website or the slides to them anymore. They need you to diagnose before they prescribe. And in order to gain the respect of these operations executives and compliance executives, you really have to come in and operate more like a consultant and a teacher and a trusted advisor and a subject matter expert more than a vendor. If you just come in and you look like a traditional vendor that's quota hungry, that's trying to get a deal on the deal board and get them closed as quickly as possible, these are super technical IT professionals, in some cases financial professionals. They're technical, they're cynical, they're not going to put up with your BS. So it's so important to be able to deliver outrageous levels of educational value and build up their trust long before they're ready for that kind of sales conversation. And in nearly all cases, this revolves around understanding at a company level what's going on, understanding who the stakeholders are, understanding their top goals and challenges, and build this amazingly impactful educational resource calendar and educational events calendar where you can attract and engage and educate and build trust with the most important people that are on these decision committees when it comes to anything and everything having to do with operations optimization and compliance. And a key mindset with all of this is, one, for sure, you don't have all the answers among your existing team members. You could have people that have worked for your company for 20 years in the exact same target accounts and buyer personas. And sure, their input is useful, but it shouldn't be the majority of the input that you use to build and document your buyer personas. Your buyer persona research actually needs to be research, not just doing a little bit of internal interviews direct out of the mouths of these folks. Face-to-face interviews, video interviews work well. If you can't do that, the next best thing is at least studying a stack of representative LinkedIn profiles and seeing what comes up on not only their social media footprint for that particular person, but when you look them up on search, what comes up. And you're looking to try to find the consensus on their professional goals, their team's professional goals, their company's goals at the intersection of data center operations and data center compliance. And we need to understand too what's driving them nuts, what's stressing them out, what their biggest challenges are. When you can get the consensus on their biggest goals, when you can get the consensus on their biggest challenges, that feeds an educational event calendar, that feeds an educational resource calendar, because our goal is to provide so much value, such a high, outrageously level value to those most important stakeholders that they want to spend time with members of your client-facing team. That's essentially how you sell. You're not selling off a deck or a website or a static pitch anymore. If you're still begging for meetings, trying to desperately get a meeting for 10 or 15 minutes to pitch what you're all about, that's not going to work anymore. And it really hasn't worked well for the past 10 years, but even more than ever, with 83% of the journey over before you meet a prospect or a client, the only way that your sales team, your AEs can deliver, your SDRs can deliver value is to show up as a helpful guide to guide those prospects and clients through their purchase decision, not to sell them stuff. So yeah, these are big, big transformation changes that need to happen within your company to be more successful. Think about 28 touch points between complete stranger and purchase decision. The better job you can do of understanding what's going on in the world and continuing to show up in a way that adds value to them, the more they want to spend time with you. The more time they spend with you, the more you're nearly guaranteed to stay on the short list, the more you're likely to get the insider track on what's really going on. You're going to move way past surface level information that you can find out on the web or on social media. They'll literally give you the insider track on what's going on in many cases when you've built that trust with them. And reps, lather, rinse, repeat. Better email, helpful educational emails, helpful educational events. You can do some of these events as webinars and live streams. You can do some of these events in person if proximity is on your side, inviting them to your facility and having great seminars, symposias, networking, breakfast seminars, lunch and learns, all of the above that helps to educate and build trust. And when you do this the right way, it's a really straightforward ask to say, hey, Bob, I see that you're registered. Typically companies that are involved in big challenges around data center operations and compliance, it takes a village. I know there's typically stakeholders from these 5 or 6 different roles. So given all of that, who else should attend? You're not asking them to formally recommend your company at this point or endorse your company. You're just saying, hey, we're having this great breakfast seminar next month. Who else from your team should attend? You'd be shocked at how well this basic email marketing automation that you've been able to do for 20 years and now is still ridiculously neglected, how incredibly impactful that is of getting to see wow, I'm looking at my registration confirmation emails. I'm looking in HubSpot. I'm looking at Eventbrite, whatever I'm using to attract this. And there's 5 or 6 people from the same company out of 40 that have registered. And they're all from the same company. And they're all from the same team or two. Holy crap, this is working. They're talking about us. We have an opportunity to help drive alignment across their teams and shape their beliefs and shape how they compare all of the different options that are in front of them when it comes to anything and everything having to do with optimizing their operations and compliance. It's a beautiful thing. It's just so many companies are making their investments in a way that really belongs in a bygone era that really stopped being effective 10, 15 years ago. The transformation, the human part, is the most difficult part. So the better job you can do of adjusting your team to be better aligned with what your prospects and clients care about and their preferences, the more they're going to want to spend time with you. And the more surface area that your company consumes in those 28 touch points between complete stranger and purchases, and the more you're starving out the oxygen for your prospects and clients to want to spend time with your direct competitors and indirect competitors and non-business model competitors. And the more likely it is, again, that you're going to get the inside scoop about what they care most about, who are the key players, who's the detractor to stay away from, what's the right timing, what they're not happy about with the status quo when it comes to anything and everything having to do with data center operations, optimization, and compliance. So at like a high level, that's how we would approach it. And obviously you want your account executives to participate in these events and these experiences as educators, as consultants, as trusted advisors, not as obnoxious, pushy salespeople, but are showing up in a way that are adding value to the educational experience. For some of them who've been at this long enough, some of them could be speakers, some of them could be moderators, some of them could be introducers. For some of the people that are relatively new, maybe they're helping to check people in at the door and answer logistics questions, more like a concierge or tour guide. But there's a role for everyone, but the most important thing is this context of really realizing that going forward, your company needs to be seen by your most important stakeholders as the be-all end-all experts when it comes to anything and everything having to do with optimizing data center operations and data center compliance. So at a high level, that's how I would approach selling data center operations, optimization, and compliance. And that brings us to our final question for this week's data center go-to-market sales and marketing Q&A show. If you've been getting good value from today's show so far, make sure that you hit the like button. And the final question is, oh, by the way, if you want to make sure that you get notified about upcoming events like this and upcoming educational resources similar to this, make sure you subscribe to our data center sales and marketing newsletter that comes to your email inbox each Sunday. You can do so directly on our website at www.dcsmi.com. So final question. How do we improve awareness of data center recruiting services and manage client relationships? So you're a recruiter and you want to be able to improve awareness of your data center recruiting services and manage client relationships. So depending on how big your company is, how big you are as an executive search or a recruiter firm, these could be two different jobs, or it could be a one-person recruiter firm who's just wearing a lot of different hats. And what's really interesting, so we consider, when it comes to the data center ecosystem, there's 5 broad segments. You have the operators, the technology companies, the facilities companies. We combine construction, real estate, and investment companies all together because there's so much that they have in common. And then there's a 5th part of the data center ecosystem, the digital infrastructure ecosystem, outsourced sales and marketing. We actually consider recruiters part of outsourced sales and marketing. Why? Because they're essentially marketing these open jobs and trying to sell candidates on joining your company. So when it comes to being more effective at marketing and selling these open positions and improving the awareness of your recruiting services and managing client relationships, we need to understand that the self-driven buyer's journey that applies across all the different stakeholders within the full data center ecosystem applies just as much to recruiters. You still need to educate and build trust. And frankly, when it comes to the category that recruiters exist in, it's a higher bar because recruiters by definition are sometimes not considered in the highest trust. And you'll know that because if you've been doing this a while, you know that there's some people that do what you do that don't have a great reputation, that do a lot of sleazy below board kind of things. So we need to work extra hard to not only improve awareness, but improve the brand perception of what your company is all about. And when I say branding, this is everything that the marketplace says about you and your company when you're not in the room. And given that you're not in the room for the first 83% of most journeys now, it's incumbent upon you to make sure that your educational resources and educational events take the place of what used to happen in one-on-one conversations. So there's actually even two parts of the funnel for recruiters. You have being able to sign on clients that have job requirements, job openings that you're recruiting for. And then there's creating awareness among candidates, as it really doesn't do you much good if you get a 10 out of 10 in one of those areas and a 1 out of 10 or a 3 out of 10 in the other area. You need to be good at attracting and retaining and managing client relationships. And you also need to do a good job with your candidates. Without the two things coming together, it's really hard to build a successful recruiting business. So what's super interesting is a lot of data center recruiters are finally getting the memo about the digital buyer's journey. A couple of them in particular globally are just doing a fantastic job in this area. Like Andy Davis, who has the Data Center Club, has built this amazing resource for candidates that for his recruiting firm that has, I think, about 20 or 30 professional recruiters, and should be a reasonably good funnel for both hiring managers and for the candidates themselves. Reese Morgan from a executive search firm in Singapore is also doing this with a similar kind of, and Andy Davis also has a podcast in addition to the group and has published a salary survey. Reese Morgan has a weekly show called Data Center News Asia, where he and his partner from DC Byte also, they talk weekly about news that's going on in the data center industry in Asia. And they sometimes do live interviews at conferences. Sometimes they film these interviews in studio. But those are two perfect examples of recruiters recognizing that getting in early and often and being seen as an industry expert is incredibly important, because there's still a lot of cynical IT professionals and facilities professionals in this ecosystem who don't have a high opinion of recruiters as a profession. So you got to work extra hard to really differentiate yourself throughout the full buyer's journey and be seen as an expert, as a subject matter expert, to gain the trust as a educator. So there's a lot of things that you can do to improve that playbook, but it's mostly recognizing that the cynical IT professional, the cynical facilities professional, regardless of whether they're a hiring manager or whether they're a candidate, it's super important to be able to intercept them as early as possible, long before they have a job requirement, long before they're looking for a new job, and build a brand with that individual. And these could be, for hiring managers, it might be anywhere from a few weeks to a few months. For candidates, it may be a few years. This is a long game to be able to invest in doing this. And I think going forward, those two examples that I mentioned right now are differentiators. I think 5-10 years out from now, or maybe even considerably sooner, not having that kind of platform is going to be a massive competitive liability, meaning that being able to have a strong brand for powering word of mouth referrals and strong reputation management, and being able to be seen as an industry expert and an educator and a trust builder and a thought leader is going to become incredibly important to be in this space that in many cases people might assume is commoditized. By the nature of the massive skill shortages, I often hear people talk about like 300,000 unfilled jobs globally in the data center ecosystem. So with that alone, there'll be a role even for some mediocre or for some lousy recruiters who aren't doing a good job with client relationships or building awareness. But I think going forward, when you think with a multi-year time horizon, the ones that are out front, building a strong personal and a professional brand, building up their recruiting firm's reputation, are going to be much, much more impactful than unknown recruiters. They're going to have thousands or tens of thousands of raving fans that follow them on LinkedIn, that comment and engage on their posts, that attend their webinars, that come to see them speak, that are sources of referrals. And it's such a different game than it was as recently as 20, 25 years ago, when cold calling was the primary playbook. Running classified ads in print newspapers and Craigslist and things like that were a primary part of the playbook. It's word of mouth, but it's digital word of mouth. So it doesn't surprise me to see that some of the recruiters in this space are already getting big time into podcasting and interview podcasting as a way to build a mini media company for their most important buyer personas going forward. I think that's a really important playbook for the full data center ecosystem, regardless of whether you're from an operator or a technology or facilities company or construction, real estate, investment company, or a outsourced sales and marketing company. So improving awareness of data center recruiting services and managing client relationships. We've so far talked primarily about improving awareness. Managing client relationships, I think there's a lot to be said for taking many of the best practices from professional services firms in and around digital infrastructure, data center, and critical facilities, and applying those to recruiters. In other words, look at what an account manager or customer success manager does for a big data center operator or a big technology company that sells to and partners with that, and make sure that you're covering all the bases for a great onboarding experience for both hiring managers and candidates, for a fantastic way of getting them introduced to all your resources and how to get the most value from working with your firm to help them get to their initial value, intended value, and extended value, so they become raving fans that love what you're all about, both on the hiring manager side and on the candidate side, and having special exclusive events that are just for hiring managers, that are just for candidates, where you continue to educate and build trust with them long after you already have them in a candidate pipeline or are working on recruiting for a open job. The more you can do with showing up and continuing to add value as a teacher, as a consultant, as a trusted advisor, not just pre-sales, not just before you get the job rec, not just before you get the candidate to have you involved in presenting opportunities, but throughout their full life cycle. Like, how do you know what you should be talking about? Buyer persona 101. Figure out what their biggest goals are, figure out what their biggest challenges are in their own words, and literally create educational resources and educational events that teach them how they can do better with their recruiting and their retention on a hiring manager perspective, how they can do better as a candidate. And you may have some of these answers internally with your own expertise, with your own internal subject matter experts. In some cases, you may bring in consultants, you may bring in partners, you may bring in other hiring managers or other candidates that are open to talking about these kinds of things. Will everyone be open to jumping in front of a microphone and being interviewed on a podcast or on a webinar panel? Of course not. But some people for sure will. The ones that you've built strong trust with, the ones that like jumping in front of a microphone. How do you know who likes to jump in front of a microphone? Well, they have their own podcasts. They speak at other people's events. They speak at other people's webinars. They guest blog. They're active on LinkedIn. All of these are leading indicators that people like to talk. So from a managing client relationship perspective, sure, great CRM, great account management, great customer success management, best practices. But I think educational events and building a vibrant community will help you become a lot stickier, build a much more loyal base, both on the hiring manager side and on the candidate side. So if I was sitting down and having lunch with Andy Davis or Reese Morgan or another recruiter, a big high profile recruiter in the data center space, and they're asking me for advice on data center recruiting services, of building awareness and client management perspectives from a go-to-market perspective across the full ecosystem, of having worked with many of the dozens of different kinds of business models in the space, that's how I would approach all of this. It's all about educating and building trust. So those are my thoughts on improving awareness for data center recruiting and managing client relationships. And that brings us to the end of this week's Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A show. I'm so glad that you're able to join us this week. If you got good value from this show, make sure that you hit the like button. And if you have an idea for an upcoming topic that we should tackle in a future show, I'd love if you left that in the comments field as well. I wish you great success in growing your data center related business. Have a fantastic week. Have a fantastic month. Have a fantastic, as we come down the home stretch on this great year, have a fantastic end of year. And I wish you great success for a very prosperous new year. I'm Joshua Feinberg from DCSMI. If we're not connected on LinkedIn, feel free to send me a connect, mention that you watch the show, and I'd love to connect with you as well. Wishing you great success. Until next week, take care now.
Data Center Go-to-Market Sales and Marketing Q&A is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales marketing and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that's www.dcsmi.com.